Imagine a boy in the late 1800s, barefoot, broke, and carrying nothing but a stubborn dream. They laughed at him. They called him foolish. Even his own family turned him away, leaving him in the cold. Twice he failed. Twice he was crushed. And yet, from the ashes of humiliation, he rose. This is not just the story of chocolate. This is the untold truth of Milton Hershey, a farm boy who refused to surrender, a boy who turned rejection into obsession and obsession into an empire. At a time when chocolate was a rare luxury, Hershey dared to imagine it as a taste for the masses, not just the wealthy elite. He built his dream with sugar, sweat, and sacrifice, transforming sweetness into survival, and survival into one of the most powerful legacies in American history. But Hershey's rise was no fairy tale. Behind the sweetness lies a darker truth: betrayal, loss, and secrets buried beneath the success. What he created was more than candy. It was a revolution, a promise that even the poorest dreamer could change the world. Tonight, you will discover how one farm boy built more than chocolate bars. He built hope. He built joy. He built an empire that still melts in the hearts of millions. This is the secret story of Hershey. Imagine the smell of earth after rain. Imagine a farm boy in the 1860s Pennsylvania, with dirt under his fingernails, clothes patched by his mother's hands, and eyes that held more questions than answers. His name was Milton Hershey. He was not born into wealth. He was not born into opportunity. He was born into hardship, a son of the soil who knew the ache of hunger and the sting of failure long before he tasted sweetness. Milton's childhood was marked by instability. His father, Henry Hershey, was a restless dreamer who drifted from one scheme to another, rarely bringing success home. His mother, Fanny, was the anchor, strict, religious, determined to instill discipline in her son. From her, Milton learned the value of persistence. From his father, he inherited restless ambition. The combination would shape his life, a dreamer forced to become a doer. By his early teens, Milton had little formal education. School was abandoned after 4th grade. What remained was a hunger to find purpose. He apprenticed to a printer, but the work bored him. He wanted creation, not repetition. His mother arranged another apprenticeship, this time with a candy maker in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The sweet smell of boiling sugar filled the air, and something in Milton shifted. In candy, he found possibility, a trade he could master, a product that brought joy. But dreams cost money, and Milton had none. Twice he tried to open candy shops, once in Philadelphia, once in Chicago. Both ended in failure. Debt piled high, doors closed, creditors sneered. In 1881, he limped back to his hometown, broke and broken, carrying nothing but shame. He turned to his uncles for help, for a loan, for a second chance. Instead, they turned him away. They mocked his failures, told him he was foolish to keep chasing sweets when life demanded practicality. They shut the door on him, and with it, nearly shut the door on his future. But that rejection, that humiliation planted a seed. Milton Hershey, farm boy, failed apprentice, rejected nephew, decided that failure would not be his last taste. If the world would not give him sweetness, he would make his own.
Failure can break a man, but sometimes it forges him. For Milton Hershey, the sting of rejection hardened into resolve. With nothing left to lose, he took what little skill he had, the craft of candy making, and began again. This time, he set up shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He kept costs low, worked long hours, and poured himself into experimentation. The streets outside were lined with wagons, horses clopping on cobblestones, but inside, Milton's world was sugar, milk, butter, and fire. He worked not only with recipes, but with chemistry. He wanted not just candy, he wanted consistency, scalability, perfection. It was here that Hershey found his breakthrough. Caramel. Soft, chewy, shelf-stable, affordable. He learned to use fresh milk instead of condensed, giving his caramels a richer flavor. Soon, Lancaster Caramel Company was born, and for the first time, success followed. Orders poured in. His factory grew. He employed workers, paid fair wages, expanded his reach beyond Pennsylvania. But success carries its own temptations. Competitors circled. Debt still haunted him. And while caramels paid the bills, Hershey's restless ambition whispered of something greater. He began to hear rumors of a delicacy sweeping Europe: chocolate. At the time, it was rare, expensive, the privilege of aristocrats. Could it be democratized? Could chocolate become not a luxury, but a staple? Milton's heart knew the answer. He sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for an enormous sum. With that money, he gambled on a dream few believed in: chocolate for the masses. At the turn of the 20th century, chocolate was exotic. Europeans had refined it into an art form, but in America, it remained scarce and costly. Hershey saw not scarcity, but opportunity. If he could master the formula, if he could produce it cheaply and consistently, he could change not just candy, but culture. He invested in machinery, imported techniques, experimented endlessly. He hired chemists, tinkered with ratios, endured batch after failed batch. The challenge was milk chocolate: smooth, creamy, stable. Many said it couldn't be done outside Switzerland. Hershey refused to listen. And then, after years of trial, he found it. A process that transformed ordinary milk and cocoa into something extraordinary: sweet, affordable, reproducible. Hershey's milk chocolate. He built a factory in Derry Township, Pennsylvania, not far from his boyhood home. It was vast, modern, industrial. But Hershey dreamed bigger. Around the factory, he planned an entire town: houses, schools, parks, a trolley system. Workers would not just labor, they would live. Families would thrive. It was paternalism, yes, but it was also vision, a capitalist's utopia. The Hershey bar was born: simple, unpretentious, accessible. Wrapped in foil, sold for pennies. It was a revolution in sweetness. Hershey, Pennsylvania rose from farmland like a vision. Streets were laid, homes constructed, gardens planted. Workers had affordable housing, cultural amenities, even access to health care. Children played in schoolyards built by Hershey's fortune. Unlike the grim industrial towns of steel and coal, Hershey's town carried the scent of chocolate in the air. Milton himself lived modestly, eschewing opulence. He walked the town, greeted workers, asked after their families. He believed success was not only for himself, but for the community. His philanthropy extended beyond the town. The Hershey Industrial School, founded for orphan boys, provided education, housing, and hope. To this day, the Milton Hershey School remains his most enduring gift. Yet beneath the sweetness, contradictions remained. Hershey was both benevolent and controlling. Workers lived under his rules, his values. Strikes occasionally flared, dissent simmered. But compared to the brutality of other industrialists of his age, Hershey seemed almost saintly. As the Hershey Company grew, so too did its reach. Chocolate bars became a fixture of American life, from school lunches to corner stores. Hershey's Kisses, bite-sized drops wrapped in silver, turned affection into candy. Chocolate was no longer rare. It was everywhere, and Hershey's name was stamped on it all.
In 1917, as American soldiers marched into World War I, Hershey's chocolate marched with them. The U.S. Army commissioned Hershey to produce chocolate bars for rations, high in calories, durable, able to withstand transport. Soldiers received them in trenches, in mud, in fear. For many, the taste of Hershey's chocolate became synonymous with comfort, with home. The pattern repeated in World War II, when Hershey developed the D-ration bar, designed to be heat-resistant, dense, bitter enough to prevent soldiers from eating it too quickly. Over 3 billion bars were produced, shipped to every front. Hershey chocolate became part of the American war effort, fueling not just bodies, but morale. Back home, rationing and shortages tested the company. Yet Hershey adapted, innovated, survived. When the wars ended, the returning soldiers brought with them memories of fear, of brotherhood, of chocolate. Hershey had woven itself into the fabric of American identity. The farm boy had not just built a business, he had built a symbol. Sweetness as solace, chocolate as democracy, candy as hope. And yet, his story was far from over. The man who had once been turned away by his own family was now one of the most powerful industrialists in America. But even at the height of success, life would test him again. Milton Hershey, by the turn of the 20th century, was no longer the penniless boy mocked by his uncles. He was a man of stature, wealth, and vision. But for all his success, he longed for companionship. In 1898, during a trip to New York, Milton met Catherine "Kitty" Sweeney, a vivacious woman of Irish descent. They married later that year, and for the first time, Milton's life seemed complete. Kitty was elegant, social, and full of warmth. She brought a gentleness to Milton's stern work ethic, softening his edges, encouraging him to enjoy the fruits of his labor. They traveled together, hosted dinners, and built a life of shared affection. For the first time, Hershey's empire had a queen. But happiness was fragile. Kitty soon developed an illness, what doctors then called a debilitating nervous condition. Today, historians suspect it was multiple sclerosis. Her health deteriorated slowly, then rapidly. She was often confined to bed, her once bright spirit dimmed by pain. Milton stood by her side, devoted, helpless. They had no children. Kitty's illness made it impossible. For a man who dreamed of legacy, this was a cruel blow. Milton poured his energy into work, but his heart was divided between the demands of the factory and the quiet suffering in his home. In 1915, Kitty died at the age of 42. Milton was devastated. He never remarried. The man who had given sweetness to the world now carried a bitterness he could not escape. Her death left him with grief, but also with purpose. If he could not have children of his own, he would create institutions to nurture the children of others. The Milton Hershey School became not just philanthropy, but a living tribute to the love he lost. Long before Kitty's passing, Milton Hershey had founded the Hershey Industrial School in 1909, an institution for orphan boys. But after her death, his commitment to the school deepened. It became his surrogate family, his legacy of love. He endowed the school with a trust so vast it shocked contemporaries. Millions of dollars, the controlling interest in the Hershey Company. Overnight, the school became one of the wealthiest educational institutions in America. His wealth, his empire, his future, all placed in service of children who had none. At the school, boys were housed, fed, clothed, and educated. They learned trades, received discipline, and were taught to believe in possibility. Hershey himself visited regularly, walking the grounds, speaking with students, asking about their progress. He took a personal interest in their lives, seeing in them the children he never had. This legacy continues today. The Milton Hershey School, with thousands of students, remains one of the most significant philanthropic gifts in American history. Funded by the Hershey Trust, it carries forward Milton's belief that wealth was not just for accumulation, but for transformation. And yet, even in this generosity, critics saw contradictions. Some accused Hershey of paternalism, of molding boys to fit his worldview. Others pointed out the rigid discipline and strict morality imposed on students. But for countless orphans, the school was salvation, a chance they otherwise never would have had. Through grief, Hershey found a way to turn personal loss into public good. The boy who had been rejected by his own family built a home for thousands.
As Hershey's empire expanded, competitors took notice. By the early 20th century, the American candy industry was fierce. Franklin Mars, Forrest Mars, Theodore Tobler, and others were innovating with new confections. Mars introduced the Milky Way and later the Snickers bar. Nestle dominated global markets. The so-called chocolate wars had begun. Hershey relied on simplicity, the Hershey bar, Hershey's Kisses, milk chocolate as staple. Mars, however, innovated with nougat, caramel, and aggressive marketing. The rivalry was not just about taste, but about identity. Hershey's was wholesome, rural, American heartland. Mars projected cosmopolitan glamour, indulgence. During World War II, Mars gained ground with the M&M, designed for soldiers, a candy-coated chocolate that didn't melt in hands. Hershey, meanwhile, maintained its dominance in plain bars, but struggled to diversify. Still, Hershey's name remained iconic. For many Americans, chocolate and Hershey were interchangeable. Its ubiquity was its strength, even as rivals carved niches. The wars were fought not with armies, but with recipes, advertisements, and distribution networks. Milton Hershey watched it all with interest but little fear. His focus was less on competition and more on community. While Mars built an empire of brands, Hershey built a town. In the long run, both strategies would shape the global chocolate industry. When the stock market crashed in 1929, titans of industry trembled. Factories closed, banks collapsed, workers starved. Yet, in Hershey, Pennsylvania, something extraordinary happened. Instead of laying off workers, Hershey announced new construction projects. He built a hotel, a community center, a theater, even a stadium. He wanted to keep his workers employed, to keep the town alive. "If I can't use my money to make life better for my employees, what good is it?" he said. The town thrived, even as the nation faltered. Hershey became a model of industrial paternalism at its best. Workers loyal, morale high, community stable. Critics accused him of buying loyalty, of using philanthropy as control. But for families who kept food on the table during the Depression, Hershey's decisions were salvation. This period cemented his reputation not only as a businessman, but as a humanitarian. While other magnates hoarded wealth, Hershey spent his to sustain lives. The contrast was stark. He was not Rockefeller, not Carnegie. He was something different, a capitalist with a conscience, or at least with a sense of responsibility born from his own hard youth. When World War II engulfed the globe, Hershey once again found his chocolate enlisted. The U.S. Army approached the company with a request, a survival ration bar. It had to be high in calories, resistant to heat, durable in packaging. Hershey's chemists delivered the D-ration bar. It was not sweet. In fact, it was deliberately bitter, designed to prevent soldiers from eating it too quickly. Troops joked about its hardness, calling it Hitler's secret weapon. But it kept men alive, sustaining them in trenches, deserts, and jungles. Later, Hershey developed the tropical bar, tailored for hot climates. By war's end, over 3 billion bars had been produced. Hershey was awarded the Army-Navy E Award for excellence in wartime production. For soldiers, Hershey's chocolate became a symbol of home. In the chaos of war, a bite of chocolate was a reminder of childhood, of safety, of America. For civilians abroad, Hershey bars handed out by GIs became symbols of liberation, tokens of kindness. Milton Hershey himself did not live to see the war's end. He died in 1945 at the age of 88, leaving behind a company, a town, and a school. His life spanned from Civil War-era poverty to the global stage of World War II. He was, in many ways, the embodiment of the American dream, complicated, flawed, but enduring. By the 1930s, Milton Hershey had become a living legend. He was the man who gave America its chocolate bar, the builder of a town from the Pennsylvania soil, and the benefactor of thousands of orphan boys. Yet, as he entered his twilight years, he was a man who seemed both satisfied and restless. Milton lived modestly, often spotted strolling through the streets of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Townspeople greeted him warmly. Children waved, sometimes chasing after him for a smile. Though he was one of the wealthiest men in America, he wore simple suits and lived without extravagance. The grandest luxury he allowed himself was a suite in the Hotel Hershey, overlooking the rolling farmland that reminded him of his roots. He was often quiet, contemplative. Friends recalled his occasional loneliness, the grief that never fully left him after Kitty's death. Yet he rarely allowed sorrow to overcome his public face. Instead, he threw himself into his school, into projects that would endure long after he was gone. Milton Hershey died on October 13, 1945, at the age of 88. His passing was met with mourning across the nation. Newspapers hailed him as a titan of industry, but also as a rare capitalist who had used wealth not only to build power, but to uplift others. The thousands of boys at the Hershey School wept for the man who had been to them both a provider and a father. The world was already changing. Hershey left behind an empire, but also a question. Could the company, the town, and the school live up to his legacy without him? Or would time erode what one man so carefully built?
Unlike many industrial dynasties, Milton Hershey left no children to inherit his fortune. His empire did not pass to bloodline, but to trustees. The Hershey Industrial School Trust became the controlling shareholder of the Hershey Chocolate Corporation, ensuring that his profits would forever flow toward the education and care of orphan children. It was an unprecedented decision. At a time when tycoons like Rockefeller and Carnegie established foundations but kept control within families, Hershey handed everything to a cause greater than himself. He guaranteed that his life's work would never become just another private fortune. But such a legacy carried challenges. Trustees were tasked with not just managing a candy company, but with preserving Hershey's values. Decisions were made with one eye on the market and the other on Milton's vision. Sometimes these goals aligned. Often they clashed. Workers wondered if the company would maintain Hershey's paternal spirit without his personal presence. Residents of the town feared corporate managers would lack his devotion to community. Students at the school worried whether they would still feel Milton's invisible hand guiding their future. In the years immediately after his death, the company struggled to adapt. Leadership debates emerged, modernization was uneven, and competitors gained ground. But the Hershey School stood firm, growing into one of the most financially secure institutions in the country. Hershey's unusual choice had ensured that while rivals sought profit, his empire remained tied to purpose. The end of World War II ushered in prosperity across the United States. Suburbs blossomed, supermarkets multiplied, and consumer goods flooded the market. Chocolate was no longer a rare indulgence, but a staple of everyday life. For Hershey, this meant both opportunity and pressure. Soldiers returning from Europe carried fond memories of Hershey bars in their rations. Children who had known scarcity during wartime now begged for candy as a symbol of peacetime abundance. Hershey had become, in many ways, America's chocolate. But competitors were bolder than ever. Mars pushed the Milky Way, Snickers, and M&Ms. Nestle offered global variety. New brands experimented with advertising that made candy glamorous. Hershey, rooted in tradition, sometimes lagged behind. Yet the company innovated where it mattered. Hershey's syrup became a household staple, poured over ice cream in suburban kitchens. Hershey expanded distribution, ensuring bars reached not just small-town stores, but the aisles of giant supermarkets. The post-war era cemented Hershey as not just a candy company, but a cultural icon. Children grew up unwrapping foil from Hershey's Kisses, their sweetness woven into birthdays, holidays, and Halloween nights. In those years, Milton Hershey's simple bar of milk chocolate evolved from invention into tradition. As the decades advanced, Hershey, Pennsylvania remained a symbol of Milton's vision, a tidy, thriving community where industry and humanity coexisted. But cracks began to show. By the 1960s, America was changing. The post-war consensus fractured. Workers across industries demanded more rights, and the idyllic paternalism of company towns was questioned. Hershey employees admired their jobs, but also wanted more independence. Some bristled at the sense that Hershey, Pennsylvania was less a free town than a carefully curated experiment. Meanwhile, the chocolate industry was evolving. Globalization brought new competition, rising costs of cocoa, and pressure to modernize factories. Trustees debated how much to adapt and how much to cling to tradition. The Hershey School, too, faced scrutiny. What had once seemed innovative now risked feeling outdated. Educators pushed for curriculum reform, social workers for greater emotional support. The school's wealth drew criticism from those who believed it should do more, expand further, or adapt to new needs. The name Hershey still commanded affection, but behind the sweetness lay tension. The absence of Milton's steady presence was felt deeply. For all his flaws, he had been the moral compass. Without him, the empire risked drifting. By the late 20th century, Hershey faced a crossroads. Could a company rooted in one man's ideals survive in an era of multinational corporations and shareholder demands? The answer came through reinvention. Hershey expanded internationally, bought brands, and experimented with new products. It embraced marketing campaigns that celebrated nostalgia while appealing to modern tastes. Hershey Park grew into a major attraction, ensuring the town remained a destination for families nationwide. The Hershey School, bolstered by the enormous trust, expanded its reach, eventually serving thousands of children. Critics still debated its methods, but few could deny its impact. Milton Hershey's absence loomed, but his presence lingered. Every bar sold, every kiss wrapped, every child enrolled at the school traced back to one boy from rural Pennsylvania who had once been told by his uncles he would never succeed. By surviving change, Hershey proved something rare, that a vision built on both profit and purpose could endure. Not perfectly, not without compromise, but with enough strength to outlast its founder.
By the late 20th century, chocolate was no longer a purely American obsession. It had become a global industry. Hershey, born from the Pennsylvania fields, suddenly found itself competing with giants that spanned continents. Nestle from Switzerland, Cadbury from Britain, Mars from the United States, but with global reach. For the first time, Hershey faced the unsettling truth that it could no longer rely on tradition alone. The world was changing too quickly. Consumers wanted variety, darker chocolates, gourmet blends, exotic flavors. Supermarkets brimmed with foreign brands. The global palate had grown sophisticated. In boardrooms, executives debated should Hershey cling to its identity as America's chocolate or attempt to conquer international markets. Expansion meant risk. Staying still meant decline. Hershey's first steps abroad were cautious. Partnerships in Canada, licensing deals with Asian companies, limited ventures in Latin America. But these moves revealed an uncomfortable fact. Hershey was a giant in America, but a small player abroad. The company's strength was its name, but beyond U.S. borders, the name carried little magic. For workers in Hershey, Pennsylvania, the struggle felt distant, yet real. If the company faltered internationally, the heart of Chocolate Town would feel it. For students at the Hershey School, the stakes were higher still. The school's endowment was tied to the company's fortunes. Success or failure rippled outward, affecting lives far beyond balance sheets. Milton Hershey had dreamed of permanence, but permanence in business was an illusion. The world was shifting, and Hershey had to shift with it, or risk fading into sweetness remembered only in nostalgia. While Hershey the company grappled with globalization, Hershey the town faced its own reckoning. By the 1980s and 1990s, the quaint idea of a company town felt anachronistic. Workers wanted not just jobs, but voices. Residents wanted growth, independence, and diversity beyond the chocolate brand that defined their identity. For many, Hershey, Pennsylvania remained a dreamlike place. streets lined with Hershey Kisses-shaped lampposts, schools funded by the corporation, concerts and sporting events hosted in venues built by chocolate wealth. But beneath the charm lay tension. Some criticized the Hershey Trust, which controlled vast resources through the school's endowment, for being too cautious or too powerful. Investigations probed whether trustees always acted in the best interests of children. Community members debated whether Milton Hershey's vision had been stretched beyond recognition. The school itself, once a radical haven for orphan boys, struggled to define its mission in a modern era. Poverty and disadvantage looked different in the late 20th century. Critics asked, should the trust serve more children, expand to broader causes, or remain loyal to Milton's precise wishes? The chocolate empire had been built on an ideal, that business could coexist with compassion, but ideals were fragile. They cracked under the weight of modern realities, corporate governance, legal scrutiny, shifting cultural expectations. Yet even in its challenges, Hershey retained a strange power. To walk the streets of the town, to see the lights glowing against the Pennsylvania night, was to feel that this was more than a company. It was a vision. Whether that vision was still alive or just a memory was a question no one could answer easily. As Hershey expanded, new questions emerged not about chocolate's taste, but its source. Cocoa, the very foundation of Hershey's empire, came from farms in West Africa, where allegations of child labor and exploitation stained the industry. Consumers began asking uncomfortable questions. Could their sweet treat be tied to suffering? Could the candy that symbolized American innocence carry the weight of global injustice? Hershey, along with other companies, faced growing pressure to act. Reports exposed the realities: children working in hazardous conditions, families trapped in cycles of poverty, and profits flowing upward while farmers struggled to survive. The company pledged reforms, partnerships, investments in sustainable cocoa, but critics argued progress was slow, uneven, more symbolic than substantive. For a company built on a man who had claimed to uplift the poor, the contradictions were glaring. In the shadows of Milton Hershey's legacy, these ethical questions loomed large. He had believed wealth must serve humanity. Could the modern Hershey company claim the same? Or had profit overtaken purpose? For consumers, the Hershey bar became more than candy. It became a moral choice. Every bite carried unseen stories, and in boardrooms the question echoed, could Hershey remain the symbol of sweetness if the roots of its chocolate were bitter?
The 21st century arrived with unprecedented change. Globalization was no longer an option, but a reality. Digital marketing reshaped brands. Diets shifted toward health-conscious choices, and consumers demanded transparency. Hershey, facing declining relevance among younger generations, began to reinvent itself. The company expanded into snacks beyond chocolate, purchasing brands that offered protein bars, organic treats, even gourmet alternatives. Hershey's ads rebranded the bar not just as candy, but as a symbol of American tradition, comfort, and nostalgia. In Hershey, Pennsylvania, the town leaned into tourism. Hershey Park grew, attracting families from across the country. Museums celebrated Milton's story, reminding visitors that this was more than a business, it was a legacy. The Hershey School continued to expand, using its immense endowment to serve thousands of disadvantaged children. The echoes of Milton's philanthropy still shaped lives, even as debates about governance persisted. But reinvention was not just about profits, it was about survival. In a crowded, shifting market, Hershey had to prove it was still relevant, not just as a candy company, but as a cultural icon. And somehow, against the odds, it did. The name Hershey still glowed. The kisses still sparkled in foil. The bar still cracked with the same sound that had delighted generations. Reinvention had not erased the past, it had woven the old into the new. In the end, Hershey's story was never just about chocolate. It was about resilience, about a poor farm boy who refused to give up after failures, about a widower who turned grief into generosity, about a town that became both sanctuary and experiment. Milton Hershey had once said, "What I want is to build men, not bars, not profits, but people." His dream was larger than himself, and that dream, however imperfectly, endured. Today, every time a child unwraps a Hershey's Kiss or a family gathers around s'mores by the fire, Milton's presence lingers. His company has changed, struggled, even stumbled, but it has survived, and with it, his vision. The enduring taste of a Hershey bar is more than sweetness. It is memory. It is legacy. It is proof that even from poverty, even from rejection, one boy's dream can ripple outward for generations. There is a moment when you walk through the quiet town of Hershey at night that you feel something beyond business, beyond candy. The lampposts, shaped like chocolate kisses, glow softly. The air carries a faint sweetness, and you realize you are standing inside a dream born not in boardrooms, but in the heart of a poor farm boy. Milton Hershey's life began with struggle. He knew rejection more intimately than success, hunger more deeply than plenty. When his uncles turned him away, when failure left him empty-handed, he could have stopped. He could have been forgotten. But he chose another path. And that path did not just build an empire, it built a symbol. The Hershey bar became more than chocolate. It became proof that ordinary beginnings could yield extraordinary legacies. It became the taste of American resilience. Children across the nation knew his name long before they understood his story, and maybe that was the point. Milton did not want to be remembered as a tycoon, but as a builder of joy, of community, of opportunities for children like the boy he once was. As we look back, we see that Hershey's dream was never really chocolate. Chocolate was only the vessel. His true dream was possibility. And in that dream, we are all invited. But no dream comes without shadows. Hershey's story, like America's story, is marked by contradictions. The company that brought sweetness to millions also profited from bitter labor. Cocoa farms far from Pennsylvania revealed children bent under the weight of poverty, their futures as fragile as the pods they harvested. For a company built on the idea of uplift, these revelations struck like a betrayal. And within Hershey itself, the town wrestled with the weight of paternalism. Was freedom to live in a company town, or control? Was the Hershey School a beacon of opportunity or a monument too rigid to meet modern needs? These shadows do not erase the light, but they complicate it. They remind us that legacies are not pure. They are mixtures of triumph and failure, vision and blindness, compassion and compromise. Milton Hershey believed in forgiveness. He forgave himself for his early failures, forgave the world for its hardships, forgave fate for taking his wife before they could raise children. Perhaps in the same spirit, we too must forgive Hershey's story for its imperfections, not to excuse them, but to acknowledge that even flawed legacies can bear fruit. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means remembering fully both the sweetness and the shadows, and choosing to carry forward the lessons.
Chocolate is not just a flavor. It is an emotion, a memory. For millions of Americans, the first Hershey bar was more than a treat. It was a marker of childhood, a moment of comfort, a symbol of celebration. During wars, Hershey bars were slipped into soldiers' rations, carrying with them a taste of home. During birthdays, holidays, and summer nights, kisses and bars alike became shorthand for joy. In quiet kitchens, mothers tucked them into lunchboxes. In bustling campfires, friends shared them over s'mores. Each of these moments carried Milton's invisible touch. He never knew most of the people whose lives he brightened, but that did not matter. He believed that wealth, when shared, could ripple outward in unseen ways. And in that ripple we find love. Not romantic love, not even personal love, but the broad, generous love of a man who wanted to make life sweeter for those who came after him. The taste of memory lingers, not because chocolate is sweet, but because Hershey embedded within it something deeper, hope. There is a story whispered among Hershey's employees that Milton never raised his voice in anger at those who failed him. He had known failure himself too well to scorn it in others.
Instead, he offered second chances, believing that mistakes were not endings, but beginnings in disguise. This spirit of forgiveness defined his empire more than profit ever did. He forgave himself for not being able to have children of his own by devoting his fortune to children without families. He forgave the small-mindedness of those who mocked his vision by building a town that outlived their laughter. And today, as we confront the complexities of his legacy, the contradictions of industry, the questions of ethics, we too are invited to forgive, not to erase, but to heal. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the strongest act of love. It says, I see the flaws, I see the pain, and still, I choose to carry forward what is good. In Hershey's story, forgiveness becomes the bridge. It connects the poor boy who failed, the widower who grieved, the tycoon who gave, and the company that stumbled. It connects us too, reminding us that love, even flawed, is worth carrying forward. And so we arrive at the end, not of Hershey's story, but of this telling of it. The bars still line store shelves, the kisses still glimmer in foil, the town still hums with laughter and light. But beyond all of that, Hershey's legacy endures in a more invisible way. It endures in every child who finds shelter and education at the Hershey School. It endures in every worker who earns dignity through honest labor. It endures in every family who gathers around sweetness, even in hard times. Hershey's story is not about chocolate. It is about love. A love that took the form of a bar, yes, but also the form of opportunity, generosity, and resilience. A love that forgave failure, embraced imperfection, and still chose to give. When we unwrap a Hershey bar, we unwrap more than candy. We unwrap the dream of a boy who believed that sweetness could heal bitterness, that generosity could outlive grief, that love could be baked into the fabric of everyday life. And maybe that is the real untold truth. Empires rise and fall. Fortunes shift. Controversies fade. But love disguised as chocolate, lasts. So when you taste a Hershey bar, remember the boy who once had nothing and gave us something enduring. Remember that love, even in its simplest form, can change the world.